You keep hearing Daniel Cormier say that fighters are making more money on this card. But from my side, I'm not seeing a single extra dollar. Nothing about my paycheck changed because of this deal. Even with the massive $7 billion agreement with Paramount Plus, UFC fighters haven't actually felt that money. Justin Gaethje said it plainly, and Alex Pereira even posted a mysterious message hinting at problems with his own contract. All of this slowly turned into a pay dispute that began threatening the massive White House fight card. Gaethje decided to speak openly. And the story doesn't really begin at the White House. It doesn't start at the press conference for what was supposed to be the biggest fight card the UFC has ever produced. The real beginning happened weeks earlier, on January 21, 2026, during Media Day for UFC 324. That event marked the first numbered UFC show under the brand new Paramount Plus broadcasting era. On that day, Justin Gaethje sat down in front of a group of reporters and said something the UFC had spent months insisting was not true. To understand why his words carried so much weight, you have to understand the narrative the UFC had been promoting. In late 2025, TKO finalized a 7-year broadcast deal worth $7 billion with Paramount Plus. The traditional pay-per-view model, where the biggest fights usually meant the biggest paydays for fighters, was effectively replaced. Instead, the promotion moved toward a fixed streaming arrangement valued at roughly $1 billion every year. Dana White repeatedly said fighters would benefit. Raises were supposedly on the way. Performance bonuses were rumored to have doubled. UFC commentator Daniel Cormier even told listeners on his podcast that fighters were already earning more money. According to him, contracts were being adjusted and renegotiated with generosity. The overall message coming from the organization was simple and consistent. This deal benefits the fighters. Then Gaethje sat down at that media table and tore that narrative apart. Gaethje had just headlined the very first Paramount Plus event. He had also just won the interim lightweight title after defeating Paddy Pimblett, performing in front of the new broadcast audience that the UFC was now building its future around. Yet when reporters asked about the new deal, he delivered a blunt answer. I hear Daniel Cormier saying everybody's going to get paid more on this card. I'm not getting $1 more than I would have if this deal never happened. There was nothing vague about the comment. It wasn't filtered through a public relations statement or softened with careful wording. It was a direct, on-record statement from the fighter who headlined the debut event of the UFC's billion-dollar broadcast era, and he was saying he had not received a single additional dollar because of it. Within hours, that quote dominated MMA discussions online. Social media, especially MMA Twitter, exploded with debate. And Gaethje wasn't finished. He then brought up another statistic from his career: 14 performance bonuses. Altogether, those bonuses had not even reached $1 million. Think about that number for a moment. 14 different times, Justin Gaethje had produced performances so exciting and violent inside the octagon that the UFC rewarded him with extra cash. 14 times he delivered fights that fans still talk about today. Yet when all those bonuses were added together, the total still did not cross the 7-figure mark. To have 14 bonuses and not equal up to $1 million, it's not right, he said. It should be way more than that. I should have had the chance to make smarter decisions with my money, but I didn't and I haven't. Then he took the conversation even further, moving away from numbers and talking about real life. Gaethje explained that he bought a house in Arizona, just a mile away from his parents. His sister now rents that house. He spoke about using his fight earnings to help his family, paying for vacations together and buying Christmas gifts that otherwise would have been impossible. It was a revealing moment. A fighter known for brutal wars inside the cage describing the limits of what those sacrifices had earned him financially. 2 days later, things escalated. A video surfaced showing Gaethje confronting Daniel Cormier directly, and the exchange was anything but calm. "You're out here saying everybody is getting paid more," Gaethje told him. "But you're lying. Why would you say that? Why would you talk like that when you don't actually know what's going on?" Cormier immediately tried to walk it back. "I didn't say everybody," he replied. "I'm doing this to help you guys. I love you." Gaethje clearly didn't accept that explanation. "See, that's exactly how you lie to people," he shot back. Just like that. Nonchalantly. "That's crazy." The criticism didn't stop there. Gaethje also aimed frustration at fighter management, specifically mentioning Cormier and manager Ali Abdelaziz. "At different times I've had to pull both of you off your knees when you're in front of the UFC," Gaethje said. At that point, it was clear this wasn't simply a frustrated fighter complaining about one contract. Gaethje was openly calling out the system he believed prevented fighters from getting their fair share. Dana White responded quickly. Less than 24 hours later, he appeared on the Pat McAfee show and pushed back against Gaethje's claims. According to White, the situation looked very different from the UFC's perspective. He said Gaethje had actually been offered a larger deal but never responded to it. White insisted the promotion had already calculated the numbers and that the new financial system was working exactly as intended. In the UFC's version of events, the math was already done, and everything added up. From the UFC's perspective, Gaethje had essentially left money on the table himself. From Gaethje's perspective, the real issue was that the money offered was never enough to begin with. Two completely different interpretations of the same situation, and with no transparency from the promotion to clarify the numbers, the gap between those narratives only widened. Gaethje wasn't the only fighter speaking up during that period. Sean Strickland openly described UFC pay as predatory around the same time. But not everyone agreed with that assessment. Dan Hooker pushed back, explaining that under the new Paramount Plus structure his own manager had secured a pay increase. To him, that was evidence the new era wasn't automatically bad for fighters. But it also revealed something else. How much a fighter earned seemed to depend almost entirely on negotiation. Who represented you, how aggressive they were, and how much leverage you had in the room. The system remained largely opaque, built around private negotiations rather than clear formulas. And according to several of the sport's biggest names, the money fighters were receiving still did not feel remotely proportional to the $7 billion deal the UFC was now operating under. That tension was already simmering when the White House card was first announced. Justin Gaethje, the fighter scheduled to headline the most historic night in UFC history on June 14, had already stood in front of reporters and publicly stated that the organization wasn't paying him what the new deal was supposedly worth. Then the UFC placed that same fighter at the center of its biggest stage yet, the South Lawn of the White House. Once Gaethje's comments were on the record, the issue of fighter pay didn't remain confined to that January media day. The controversy followed the event announcement all the way to Washington. Behind the scenes, contract negotiations were continuing during the transition into the Paramount Plus era. The financial reshuffling happening across the roster was the same environment that had already pushed Gaethje to publicly say he hadn't received a single extra dollar. Speculation quickly exploded. Was one of the UFC's biggest stars actually locked in a standoff over money? Had the massive contract renegotiations under the Paramount era stalled when they reached a fighter the promotion absolutely needed on a historic card? The cryptic signals coming from fighters carried unmistakable leverage. When someone with real market value hints publicly that negotiations are difficult, it's rarely accidental. It's a way of making a position visible without spelling out every detail. For months, nothing official came out. No announcement. No resolution. Just silence. That silence stretched through the end of the year and into the opening months of 2026, building quiet suspense across the MMA world. Then on March 16, 2026, Alex Pereira appeared on the Ariel Helwani show. And suddenly the mystery ended. Pereira revealed that his deal had been finalized. Not just renewed, finalized as an 8-fight contract, almost certainly the final UFC deal of his career considering both his age and the long arc of a combat sports journey that had already spanned decades at the highest levels. "They gave me a new contract," Pereira said. "I'm really happy with my new contract." The contrast with Gaethje's earlier comments could not have been clearer. Where Gaethje sounded worn down, like a fighter who had given everything to the sport but still felt the balance sheet didn't reflect that sacrifice, Pereira sounded relieved. His tone carried the release of tension from a negotiation that had finally resolved in his favor. He didn't just express happiness either. Pereira specifically mentioned the people involved in making the deal happen: McNard, Hunter Campbell, and Dana White, thanking them in a way that felt genuine rather than ceremonial. According to Pereira, the UFC had taken very good care of him. In fact, he said the terms of the agreement were satisfying enough that he was comfortable handing complete control of his future schedule back to the promotion. "Book whoever you want. Put me wherever you want," he said. "The deal is done and I trust it." He doubled down on the message moments later. "I think it's good. Like I told you, bro, I signed that new deal. They can put whoever they want to fight me. I'll fight. No problem." To truly understand the weight behind those words, you have to understand where Pereira came from. He grew up poor in Brazil. Before becoming a world champion kickboxer, he worked driving trucks just to survive. He entered MMA relatively late compared to most fighters, building his record step by step before exploding onto the global stage with a run of performances that turned him into one of the UFC's most talked about active athletes. Now 38 years old, Pereira was preparing to face Cyril Gane in the co-main event of the most historic UFC card ever assembled. And in order to pursue that moment, he had vacated the light heavyweight title he had fought so hard to win and defend. When asked about that decision, Pereira sounded completely at peace with it. The new contract had resolved the financial uncertainties that once weighed on him. Letting go of the belt no longer felt like a sacrifice, it felt like freedom. What had once been hesitation had now turned into certainty. No go had transformed into no problem. The journey from that mysterious Instagram message, the one that triggered months of speculation across the MMA world, to a calm interview announcing a finalized deal tells the story of a fighter who stood firm during negotiations and ultimately walked away satisfied. Pereira got what he needed. But while Pereira's road to the White House card was a slow, quiet negotiation that ended in relief, Justin Gaethje's path unfolded very differently. His story was chaos. Gaethje's journey toward the main event of UFC Freedom Fights 250 became a 72-hour emotional explosion. A sequence of rejection, sudden reversal, and mental whiplash that might have shaken almost any fighter's confidence. Picture the moment. Thursday, March 5, 2026. Less than 2 weeks before UFC 326, the event where the White House card would officially be revealed, Gaethje received a phone call from the UFC. The message was blunt. No ambiguity. No careful wording. You are definitely not fighting on the White House card. Just like that, the door was shut. Gaethje processed it the way fighters learn to process disappointment, by compartmentalizing. Years in the sport had trained him to accept outcomes he couldn't control. So I was like, alright, cool, he later said. There was no meltdown on social media. No public outburst. He simply accepted the news and began mentally preparing to move forward. Then the next day arrived. Friday, March 6th. The phone rang again. Same number. Same organization. But this time the message was completely different. You might be on the White House card. The door that had been slammed shut just 24 hours earlier suddenly creaked open again. Not fully open. Not guaranteed. Just barely. The door wasn't thrown wide open. It wasn't even confirmed. It was only slightly cracked. And that distinction matters more than it seems. Being told no, a clear and final no, is something fighters can process. They deal with rejection all the time. A definitive answer allows them to reset their focus, redirect their plans and move forward. But this situation was different. Gaethje was first given a firm answer, a complete rejection. He spent an entire day adjusting to that reality, mentally turning his attention elsewhere. And then suddenly, after fully accepting the outcome, the message changed to maybe. That kind of reversal hits differently. Gaethje summed up the emotional whiplash perfectly. How are you going to go a complete 180 turn on me? To understand why that moment carried so much weight, you also have to consider the retirement conversation quietly surrounding him at the time. Before any of those calls happened, before the Thursday rejection and the Friday reversal, rumors had already been circulating across MMA media. Gaethje was 36 years old, and after a career built on relentless violence and endurance, people wondered if the end might be approaching. Gaethje himself addressed it. Never talked about it, he said. I said if I didn't get the fight that I wanted and I felt like I deserved, I might retire. That statement carries real gravity when you remember who Gaethje is. Throughout his entire career, he has been the fighter who never turned down the hardest challenges. He fought elite opponents in brutal matchups, often at unfavorable odds. His reputation wasn't built on careful matchmaking, it was built on willingness. And yet, during the window when the White House card was being assembled, he was privately considering something serious. If the right fight never came, if the right stage never appeared, if the sport he had sacrificed so much for never properly acknowledged what he'd given it, he might walk away. Not as a negotiating tactic, not as a public threat, as a genuine personal decision. On Thursday, the UFC told him the opportunity wasn't coming. He accepted it. Then everything changed. On Saturday, March 7th, during the live UFC 326 broadcast, Gaethje discovered that not only was he on the card, he was the main event, fighting Ilia Topuria for the undisputed lightweight championship. The sequence unfolded like this. Thursday, definitely not on the card. Friday, maybe on the card. Saturday, headlining the biggest UFC event in history against one of the most dangerous fighters alive, on the south lawn of the White House. Gaethje never tried to pretend the stakes were comfortable. He understood exactly who was standing across from him. Ilia Topuria had just scored 3 straight knockout victories over Charles Oliveira, Max Holloway, and Alexander Volkanovski, 3 of the most technically brilliant fighters the sport has ever seen. That kind of momentum creates a gravitational threat that every opponent can feel. Gaethje acknowledged it openly. "This is going to be very easy to convince myself that I'm in a lot of danger," he said. "It's nerve-wracking. It's scary. But it's exactly what me as a competitor has done my whole life." And then he said the line that captures the entire story. The pay complaints back in January. The quiet retirement considerations. The chaotic 72-hour booking roller coaster. The 14 performance bonuses that still hadn't reached $1 million. "If I win this fight," Gaethje said, "just imagine how special the latter part of my career could be." That single sentence holds the entire arc. A veteran fighter, brutally honest about money, honest about fear, honest about the possibility of walking away, suddenly standing on the biggest stage the sport has ever created and choosing to keep fighting exactly the way he always has. Both Gaethje and Alex Pereira pushed back against the UFC's pay structure. Both stood their ground during negotiations. And eventually, both reached deals that allowed them to say yes to the moment. But not everyone did. For every fighter who secured a place on the card, others were left outside. And the argument over money didn't quiet down. If anything, it grew louder. The White House event may be the most prestigious card the UFC has ever assembled. But at the same time, it has also become the perfect pressure chamber for every financial, organizational, and political tension that has been building beneath the sport since the Paramount deal reshaped its economic structure. Because for every fighter who signed a new contract, another one was left on the outside looking in. And the loudest voice among them refused to stay silent. Jon Jones. A man whose argument for being the greatest mixed martial artist in history is stronger than almost anyone else's. Jones had come out of retirement specifically because of this card. He re-entered the USADA testing pool. He underwent stem cell treatment on his arthritic hip shortly before the UFC 326 announcement. His training camp was scheduled to begin on March 9th. According to Jones, negotiations actually happened. Real negotiations. Not rumors or speculation. Genuine back-and-forth conversations between him and the promotion. Jones even said he reduced his original asking price as a gesture of compromise. What came back in response, according to him, was a low-ball offer. On March 9th, Jones published a statement on X that quickly spread across the MMA world, drawing more than 6 million views. His message was direct. "Yes, I have arthritis in my hip and it's painful," Jones wrote. "But that doesn't mean I can't fight. If I had accepted the low-ball offer, suddenly my hip would be fine." He also addressed the timeline directly. "As recently as Friday, the UFC was calling me trying to get me on that White House card for a much lower number." That Friday was the same day Gaethje received his sudden, "maybe you're on the card" phone call. Apparently the UFC's phones were very busy that day. Then Jones said something that sent shockwaves through the MMA world. He publicly requested to be released from his UFC contract. No ambiguity. No negotiation. Just a clean break. Dana White responded publicly soon after, and his version of events was completely different. "Never, ever was Jon Jones even remotely in my mind," White said. He pointed to Jones's hip injury and insisted that no serious negotiations had ever taken place. Two completely opposite versions of reality. It was the same pattern that had appeared earlier in the year when Gaethje said no extra money had been offered, and Dana White insisted an offer had been made and ignored. The UFC's financial system remains largely hidden from public view. A black box. And every time a fighter opens that box and describes what they believe is happening inside, the organization presents a different explanation. Colby Covington's absence from the card carried less explosive drama, but it still had its own sting. Covington had openly campaigned for a place on the event. When the lineup was announced without his name, the reaction he described wasn't anger. It was something closer to disappointment. "I wouldn't say bothered," Covington said, "but I would just say, more like bummed." Bummed. You know, Covington connected the dots between the White House's enormous production overhead and the fighters who did not make the cut, suggesting that the massive setup costs squeezed the budget available for fighter pay, leaving stars like himself and Jones on the sidelines of a card meant to showcase the sport at its peak. The same $30 to $60 million production budget, intended to project prestige, may have limited the negotiating room needed to secure the sport's biggest names. And then there's the aspect that overshadows all personal grievances and booking dramas. The sanctioning dispute that, as of March 18, 2026, remains unresolved and threatens the official legitimacy of every result on the card. The DC Combat Sports Commission, the body that normally licenses and oversees combat sports events in Washington, D.C., has received no word from the UFC about UFC Freedom Fights 250. Commission Chair Andrew Huff confirmed that the UFC must pay a $100 permit fee, along with standard licensing fees, medical compliance and weigh-in oversight, or the bouts are considered unsanctioned under